what will this do to the economy? How will it actually move the needle? How will it actually transform a significant business process that we are doing?
Do you think we are entering another piloting phase?
90% of those proof of concepts never went into production. Those leaders who sort of made the right choice 2 years ago are now starting to see sort of significant fruit from that. Most people, in my opinion, get it wrong.
Why do you think that is?
This is such a complex problem. If you get this right, if you understand how to do it, you have the leaders to drive it, you can get significant productivity out of it.
What time horizon are we talking about, roughly? For everyone who is like, should I learn programming or not?
We need to have a serious approach to it. There might be future waves of productivity. This hasn't happened yet, but I can see that that's where we're going. This thing almost passes the Turing test.
How ready are we for AI?
Well, I think so.
Very nice to have you here, Gardar.
Nice to be here.
So we've known each other for some years now. And I think the first time we met, we had a few interactions in a row. I think you moderated a panel discussion where I was a panelist on the topic of AI and scale-ups, right?
I think that's right, yeah.
It was a McKinsey hosted event.
It was.
And then a few weeks later, I moderated a panel where you were a panelist.
Switch roles, yeah.
Yeah. It was an event hosted by Prince Daniel Fellowship.
I remember that was a fun event.
And I remember when I was kind of listening to you talk, I thought, if I ever start a podcast, I need to invite you. And here we are.
Very honored. Thank you.
And I mean, you have been at McKinsey for roughly a decade now.
Wow, yeah, gosh. It's that long.
Yeah.
True, yeah.
And you have been working with analytics, data, and AI since the beginning of your career at McKinsey, right?
Indeed, yeah.
A decade ago versus now, big difference in terms of what analytics, data, and AI means, right?
Huge difference, yeah.
Currently, you're also heading the AI practice in the Nordics for McKinsey, QuantumBlack.
Yeah.
But I know the majority of your time you're spending on globally leading the AI practice when it comes to LPs and GPs.
Indeed. And their portfolio companies.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the limited partners, LPs,
yeah.
general partners, GPs. So it's basically asset managers, investors. What does that mean in practice?
Well, that's a good question. So in practice, it basically follows, since, let's say, ChatGPT hype started, sort of what does it look like for those 2.5 years? I think there's one really big question that, larger asset managers and sort of sovereign wealth funds and folks like that are asking. It's sort of, what will this do to the economy? So where will there be growth in the economy? Where will there be decline? How can we allocate funds behind the momentum that we might see over the next decade or so, if you have a longer term perspective? So one of the things that I do and we do and with my colleagues is we think through how is AI going to impact different sectors of the economy? What are the types of companies that will be winners? What are the types of companies which might be disrupted and these types of things, and help them set up their investment strategy, portfolio strategy, and these types of things. There's also a category, with LPs in terms of how should we structure the investment that we do? Should we think differently about how we act as an LP, how we monitor the performance of our GPs, etc. So it's a bunch of those things that we do for those larger investors. And for GPs, the ones that I mostly serve and that most people will be familiar with are sort of private equity companies, sort of growth equity companies sometimes, have very similar questions around where should we be allocating capital, but also how should we be thinking about the impact of AI on companies? Like, if you're on an investment committee, you're used to thinking about companies and you've done that for a long time. And here comes this disruptive technology. What will that do if I'm looking at an asset in IT services or in customer service or in the marketing space or, in the online web space? Will the web exist in the future? These types of questions. So helping folks think through, what should be our strategy around that? And also, like, how do we think through companies? Like, how do we, in a rigorous manner understand these impacts on companies? And then, the final stage, which I probably think is the most fun, is working with their portfolio companies as well, in terms of, what are the opportunities for us to either reinvent the business model that we have and sort of create a step change in performance, or, drive our productivity in a programmatic way. So, maybe we have large functions where this technology could create productivity for us. Or there might be product innovation. So, how can we rethink our products, launch new types of products and these types of things. So, helping the management teams of those companies rethink how to approach value creation with sort of an AI lens to it. So that's sort of, long answer, but that's sort of the chain of activities that we sort of in QuantumBlack Private Capital, work with these guys on. And then, of course, the most fun is when we actually do those things. So when we're actually building AI products and sort of deploying them. So that's the most fun part of my job. But I do all of the other stuff as well.
Very interesting. And we'll dig deeper into each of those areas throughout the conversation. But what was the big starting point for the big interest among the LPs and GPs when it comes to AI? Was it the ChatGPT launch?
Well, I think so. Quite differentiated. I mean, you had some of the sort of large investors in the world that for a long time have been thinking about these issues, making them a big, part of their strategy. And they've been very public with that. Also sort of some of the largest global PE funds. But there's definitely, as in all sort of technology hype cycles, there is a moment when people who are not directly involved with the technology and developing it start to realize that, hey, this might have a much larger impact on the economy than we have, which sort of starts to set off a race to be the first to have the insights around that, to be able to, create a strategic upside from it. And I think that definitely happened after sort of the ChatGPT phase, where there was sort of, maybe there was 3, 4, 5 months of, let's understand what this can do. What is this technology? I did 100 education sessions, just going around with these folks, talking about what is the technology, what can it do, where are we in the deployment cycle of the technology, trying to also make people understand that this is very much a demo technology that we have now.
Right.
We're not really there yet. And then sort of from there, it started turning into much more, okay, what do we do with the investment strategy? How do we think about it in our investment committee? How do we think about our portfolio? Can we do a scan of our portfolio companies, figure out where it's important, and then start driving it in some other companies? That's sort of that. But yes, I mean, short answer, ChatGPT was, the starting point for all investors,
right,
everywhere to start thinking about this.
And the NVIDIA stock development, has that also fueled the interest to look into AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of, I mean, for larger asset managers that also trade in public securities, that's of course been a big focus of them. I dabble very little in the sort of public securities part that sort of other folks do. But in terms of, does it give credence to the hype? Are public markets betting behind significant impact from these technologies in the economy? And I think if you look at the revenues of NVIDIA, and if you look at how that translates into the sort of market capitalization of NVIDIA, that indicates to you that this will be, either scenario A, this will create a lot of productivity in the economy. That productivity will flow through, software companies to NVIDIA. Or B, there is a sort of arms race among the hyperscalers to not lose, because they think it's going to be a winner takes all or winner takes few, or sort of few take all type of logic, which means that there is sort of an irrational overinvestment into these types of chips. And I won't say which one it is, but I sort of, one of those scenarios, basically has to be true.
I know when you started out at McKinsey, roughly a decade ago, data, AI, and analytics wasn't as common in the room of business, right? It was something more on the side. And over the years, it has become more and more something that is very integral to every business, right?
Yeah.
Can you describe that change a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a journey. It's been a journey for us, and it's been a journey for business overall. So when I first started working in what we now refer to as AI, and I think it was only like 2 or 3 years ago, everyone decided that, okay, we can call it AI, because we used to have all these debates on, is it data, is it statistics, is it algorithms, and now we're just like,
Machine learning.
Is it machine learning? But back when this was sort of emerging, we in McKinsey, we had a bunch of people that were working on statistics, you might say. So we had folks doing pricing and working with advanced statistics to do pricing, folks doing operations research, they did optimization. We didn't call any of those sort of AI folks or sort of data scientists or anything like that. Then I guess there was a period sort of in the early 2010s where sort of data science came in, machine learning came in as sort of a complementary and often better approach to do many of these sort of predictive models and these types of models. And also, hand in hand with the development of cloud computing and more sort of advanced cloud types of systems. So McKinsey acquired a firm called QuantumBlack in 2015. And that was an AI native company. It was founded in 2009, used to do Formula One sports, like optimizing race strategies, optimizing sort of R&D portfolios of the Formula One sort of teams. Bought by McKinsey 2015, which is basically when we also then started to think about, okay, how do we shape career paths for data scientists, data engineers? How do we bring the software developers that we have into also a consulting career path? How do we integrate business teams with those types of teams? So we sort of started our journey there, which also most companies did. Like most of our clients, they were also in this period, the most common solution to doing something with AI was like, let's hire a bunch of data scientists and sort of have them come experiment with something. And that was really where the industry was, I think, sort of 2014, 2015, 2017, we started having a big hype cycle. I think that was sort of the era of proof of concepts. I was out and about doing many, many proof of concepts. And then with more serious companies productionizing market automation, recommendation engines, these types of things. But I think that was really the point in time when everyone was like, this is great. This shows a lot of potential. We get a lot of proof of concepts. We've done the research. 90% of those proof of concepts never went into production. So it was sort of an explosion of learning for companies, if you will, but it was not really very impactful for most of the companies. Lots of it was management and entertainment. And then I think the period 2017 to sort of 2022 maybe was all in a period of scaling. Like, how do we scale these systems? How do we get them production grade? There was the growth of MLOps. Like, how do we integrate MLOps? How do we build, the data science capability in with software engineering capability with our cloud platform, create a solution from that? So that's when, companies really started to get more impact at scale, I would say. Like we also started supporting companies that did, not 5 proof of concepts, but did, 150 machine learning models in production in an advanced system having real significant bottom line impact. And then, so if we call that era 2, like era 1 was, learning, experimenting, era 2 was scaling, then I think we're now in sort of era 3, which is, AI intelligence through an API type of era, which sort of supercharges everything else because, we've built the software systems, the cloud platforms, we've matured the organizations, we have the product operating models, which now means that when we get this, AI power almost off the tap with models, we don't have to maintain, we don't have to train them, we often don't have to tune them at all. It sort of superpowers the ability to actually have impact with it. I think we're still early in that third phase. So there's much more to be done in the third phase, but that's sort of where we are. And our journey has been very, analogous to this. So in the scaling phase, we built up, we went from 30 people to now we're about 1,400 people that are engineers, a couple of more thousand that are people with engineering backgrounds that are doing, these types of programs. We built our MLOps capabilities. We built our MLOps groups. We started building our cloud platforms, our patterns for that. We started building QuantumBlack Labs, which is sort of our R&D function that is doing sort of R&D and vertical vertical specific assets for different industries, for how you really scale optimization models, marketing automation type of models, life science research type of models, etc. So that we built all of that. So that's a little bit the sort of journey. I think the world of machine learning, the world of data science, or whatever we call it, has sort of been on. And I think this third phase we're in now is sort of the first one where we're getting to a level of maturity that it starts to be very realistic for a very broad piece of the economy to have significant impact through this type of technology.
This is very, very interesting, the three phases you described, because the first one, the piloting/learning phase, there's this saying where companies have more AI pilots than airlines have actual pilots, right? And it's a bit debatable kind of what was the intended purpose of these pilots. Was it learning, which is valuable in itself, or was it to put it into production eventually, right? But we know that most of the pilots never ended up in production. Then you have the second phase that you described, where you had these more recommendation systems, marketing automation, these type of use cases. And we see that many of them are implemented at scale on an enterprise level, right? And then you have this intelligence on tap with APIs. But how would you say is the difference between the underlying technology and the data we leverage? Because in the second phase, it sounds to me, based on what you describe, it's a lot of the structured data from data warehouses, maybe some data lakes, where you have very narrow problems that you solve, right? It's like next best action, recommender systems or marketing automation. And in the third phase, we have more, it's moving over to the GenAI paradigm, right?
Yeah, I think there is sort of a journey of data maturity that underlies each of these phases. I think, one of the reasons this pilot phase was a pilot phase is most companies were just not there in terms of readiness with their data foundations, their data architecture, their enterprise architecture. I think, if you look at what is the work that we were doing, over that period, let's say 2019 to 2022, like what did we spend a significant chunk of time doing? It was actually that, like data transformation, data governance programs. Our balance of engineers working within QuantumBlack probably went over with more data engineers than we had data scientists during that period.
So you cleaned up the data swamps.
Yeah, I wish I was about to say, I think we cleaned up some data swamps, right? But if you look at the average company, especially in Europe, but if you look at the average company, I would say the average maturity level is still low, across the data foundations, even for the structured data.
Right.
And now we also need to add thinking about, like, if you have the vision that, our company will be, this AI as an organization, being able to have like a hive mind, hear all the conversations, draw conclusions, insights. You need all of that unstructured data as well. And I would say, again, most companies are pretty early on that journey. So
do you think with the generative AI phase, where you don't need to train your own models, you can access, a pre-trained models through APIs, do you think the requirement on some of those data foundations has gone down?
Not on the data foundations. We need to differentiate that answer.
Yeah.
Like in some use cases, you can get better answers from a pre-trained model than you would do with a predictive model that builds on large data.
Right.
Just because reasoning will get you a better answer than a statistical model will get you the better answer. So I think it is a differentiated answer. But I would say for most of the large-scale use cases we are building, it is more a combination of traditional machine learning type of systems with the sort of unstructured data coming on top of it and the sort of API-based foundation. If we're talking about text, right, the API-based sort of text-based models coming on top of that, so the LLMs and these types of things. So most architectures that you look at has all of the components in it. So I would say, the requirement to build a strong data foundation continues to go up. And it's a very simple equation. It's like, what is the return on investment per sort of data in order that you have has gone up.
Yeah.
So it sort of makes even more sense now to bring your data maturity upwards.
Yeah. Do you think, because when I meet data leaders all over, and one of my big topics is like data quality and trust in data, and I always ask them, why do you want to talk about this now? Because this has been an issue as long as you've had an enterprise data platform, but why now? And one of the most common answers I hear is AI readiness, because C-level, the board, they want AI, and we know we need to fix the foundation, because if you have garbage in, you have catastrophe out, right? So with all of the pressure we see now on in the third phase with GenAI and so on, and there's a lot of investments going in there now, right? Do you think we are entering another piloting phase?
That is a very good question. And I, when I look across the clients that I work with, I would say there is sort of a bifurcation in two camps. So there's basically one group of companies that, ChatGPT came in 2022. They went out and they said, hey guys, let's try this technology, let's experiment, let's figure out what works and what doesn't work. And what these companies tended to do was do a long use case list, laundry list of use cases. So you'd have like 50, 60, 70 use cases coming around in a list that goes around the company. And then they would sort of spread funding to a bunch of these different pilots. The clients I have that did that, they are basically still doing that. They still have these pilots. They're not really getting it to scale. They're not really getting it to work. The other group of clients were clients that basically thought through what are the, 3 or 4, often 1 or 2 key business domains that will actually move the needle for our company. Like, where will we have significant impact if we are able to build this technology in, and put most of their resources against a holistic transformation of that domain. So, if you were in process industry, it might be we really need to get our recipe optimization and our production optimization, algorithms in place. GenAI helps us do that. So, let's improve there. If you are a consumer company, it is, this really superpowers our marketing automation, maybe our lead generation, how we're able to have personalized touch points with all our customers. Or if you are a software company, sort of this really allows us to make our software much more user-friendly, much easier to use, etc. Let's put all our resources there. So the companies that have gone for sort of focus on let's actually properly reinvent one domain, they are starting now roughly to have impact. And I think that's where we are in the sort of cycle of technology build out, is sort of those leaders who sort of made the right choice 2 years ago are now starting to see sort of significant fruit from that, making that choice.
Right. And do you see some common characteristics among the two groups of companies, the ones that do more piloting and maybe learning, as opposed to those who focus in on 1 to 2 domains and just executes?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, for me, the most important differentiators, I would say, between those companies are, one, what is the involvement of the top leadership? In many firms, especially with lower, with leaders that have lower tech capabilities, there is a pattern of delegating understanding and delegating responsibility for these programs. For me, that is when you start getting these 20, 30 pilots that don't lead anywhere. Because the business leaders are not investing their time and their minds on understanding, what can we actually do with this technology? How will it actually move the needle? How will it actually transform a significant business process that we are doing? So if you're delegating that to, more junior people in the organization, they might be sitting in many different places in the organization. They don't fully have the mandate. They can't really reinvent the business processes. They can only look at a smaller problem. That's when you sort of get it, starts getting really difficult.
Yeah. They don't have the holistic picture.
They don't have the holistic picture. They don't have the mandate to be able to do stuff. So it's like, I meet so many innovative, fantastic people, developers, product owners that are doing, could be doing amazing stuff, and I guess are doing amazing stuff to a certain extent, but they're just in the wrong place.
Right.
Too far down doing incremental stuff. Whereas the difference is, for some companies, even where the leadership, has a lower tech quotient sort of coming in, those leaders will still invest their time in driving these initiatives. They will put significant business targets into the budget of the line business. They will make the business accountable for achieving those targets. Then they will work with tech. Tech leaders do this organically because they sort of understand what the technology can do. And then they just go say, hey, we're going to reinvent our customer service. We're going to take 40% cost out and we're going to improve customer experience. But you need to sort of understand what the technology does to be able to just confidently go in and do that. And if you have a great product organization, a mature tech organization, that organization can take it and run with it.
Right.
But for most companies, that's not the case. So you need to really invest time, help people understand what can be done, give them the mandate to do it, put it properly in the business plan, all these type of things that you don't necessarily need to do if you're sort of more a tech type of company, if you will.
Right, and I know a lot of the companies that now adopt GenAI and push quite hard on it. They are coming from more traditional industries, right? Do you think what you just mentioned in terms of the success of investing into AI, relating so much to the leadership's commitment and buy-in, but also involvement, do you think that puts requirements on the leaders of these companies?
Yeah, I mean, to a huge extent. And I sort of, some of my clients I give a lot of credit because they are literally, so I've done that work with both boards and management teams of some large companies where we spend, every month or so, we spend an hour or two together walking through both what does the technology do, what can it do, what can't it do, walking through how do you build a technology organization that can deliver that, how do you think about data, at least understanding to a basic level, what do you need to do with data to enable that, doing that capability building journey, but very much in the business context of that business. Like, in our business, here is what you need to think about with data. Here is like the big use cases that you can execute on, etc. Many management teams, often coming from the CEO or the chairman of the board, pushing that initiative, saying we need to, go through this capability building journey. I think those companies, are the ones that sort of are setting themselves up for success. Then there are the other companies, where the archetype is, hey, I'll let the IT leader deal with this. I'll let the CDO deal with this. I'll delegate it down into the organization. Let's hope something good comes back. Those are the one where it's sort of dead in the water.
Like, how involved does the CEO need to be on average? Because it's one thing to say, like, I want this to happen. You have my full buy-in. You make it happen versus we make it happen, right?
Yeah. So there's impossible to give one answer to that question because it's going to be so different, but depending on what is the corporate culture. I think one of the ones that have been super vocal about this is Klarna and Sebastian there. I think there, in terms of like the CEO just needs to put a direction, and then you have a very mature organization that is experienced in taking those types of requirements, translating into what is the backlogs of the product teams and how do we get it through. I've also worked with very large companies where I've literally been in the, executive board of those companies, and the CEO is the only one who actually sort of believes in it. And then you need to take a very active role as a CEO, because then you actually need to set a direction. You need to bring, your executive board along on a journey. And often, these are amazingly talented people, obviously, in that position. They understand their industry deeply. They understand what they're working on deeply. They don't really understand exactly where this technology comes in. All the AI transformations that we've seen where we have high levels of success, we go back and we ask those folks afterwards, like, what was it that was driving that success? Almost always they come back to, it was that business leader or that business leader or that business leader who learned how does AI work in our industry.
Right.
So if we are an airline which has a significant cargo, business, it's that cargo manager, like senior executive in the cargo space, who understood how to work with AI models, machine learning, and algorithmic optimization, and could work with the development teams. That's the hero of that company that created the impact. So these business leaders who truly learn how to, work with technology-driven processes over sort of the traditional processes most companies have, that's typically the folks people point to afterwards and say, like, those were the folks who really made it happen. So sort of the developers, data scientists, etc., super important, but that's not the key differentiator unless you are very mature.
So you need the people who can mix the technology and the domain of the business.
Yeah. I mean, just like folks who deeply understand the business problem and over a period of 2 or 3 years, deeply understand, what are the machine learning models we're, have in production here? Like, how does that work? What are the development teams I need to make that work? Like, that truly understand how to get that puzzle to work together. Those are sort of the differentiating leaders that drive those sort of outsized business impact.
And this leads to another question in terms of, I know a lot of companies these days want to have an AI strategy, right? Do you think there should be a difference between an AI strategy and the business strategy itself?
No, I think this is a great question. The way we've done it, and I've done it for multiple companies, is essentially saying we need to do the AI strategic thinking. It doesn't mean that we have to have a separate AI strategy unless we are a business where that is the pivotal thing. We're a software company or something like that. But we need to do the AI strategic thinking of how will AI impact our value chains? Like, where will value pools start to differ? How will the technology stack of each of the things that we are delivering to the market, the products that we're delivering to the market, be impacted? How will customer expectations be impacted? It's like we need to do all that strategic thinking. Actually, in most industries, you'd be surprised in, how non-intuitive sometimes it is, where this actually will have fundamental impact. Once we have that, there's a series of decisions that need to be made. Like how deep are we going to go in the tech stack? Are we going to partner with tech providers? Are we going to build it ourselves? Are we going to take an ecosystem approach, an exclusive approach? Like, there's all these questions that you sort of need to answer to do it. And once you've done that, intellectual work and thinking, I think that's when you also should look at the corporate strategy and say, what are the implications on our corporate strategy and the business division strategies that we have from the thinking that we've now been doing? And that's probably when you sort of modify, append, add a few bets into the corporate strategy you have. Most legacy companies, I don't think it will be a completely new, strategic direction.
Right, but you think it's important that it eventually lands into the same document?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, every company is different, so I think you need to think about the process in different ways for all companies. But if there were to be one recipe, I would think first through, let's do the thinking on implications of AI for our industry, our products, our employees. Then let's take that thinking, look at our enterprise strategy and our corporate strategy, and think about where we need to modify it and how we should be merging them.
Right. So in this phase 3 of AI, where do you think we are in the hype cycle of that?
That is also a very important question, because I think this is the question where from my investor clients to companies adopting it, most people, in my opinion, get it wrong.
It's like everyone feels that, they missed the train on NVIDIA. They've missed the train on building foundation models or investing in companies building that. And people are a bit stressed in general, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's true. And this will, of course, be different. So I think if you look at the depth of the tech stack, and then it depends on also where are you.
Yeah.
So if you are a long-term investor, then I wouldn't say you've missed the train, but then at least many bets have been placed.
Right.
And, you will have to pay a high premium. If you look at the valuation of OpenAI, looks like it's going north of 100 billion now. That's, of course, you would have wanted to do 2 years ago. If we're talking about how is this technology applied in a business context, how is it creating value in actual businesses, we are still super early in that cycle. And I think that's sort of the artifact of ChatGPT. When that came out, late 2022, for me, that had all the hallmarks of what is a demo technology.
Right.
That's like ChatGPT in itself doesn't have an enterprise use case or a massive productivity use case. If it's just like the box, you can write stuff in and get answers, and sometimes there are hallucinations, sometimes not. You can't really do data retrieval, like none of that. It's a super cool demo because it's like, hey, this thing almost passes the Turing test. That's amazing.
Right. Yeah.
Like from a technology perspective, that's amazing. But like if you are, any type of company, even a software company, like even at the cutting edge of a software company, you can't really do anything with that level of technology yet. Then I think we've been in a phase of maturing the technology. First of all, getting retrieval augmented generation right, and sort of working with unstructured data, having chain of thought, etc., to reduce hallucinations to often an acceptable level. Then understanding how do we implement these models into our software or into the enterprise stack that we have is also a little bit of a journey. I think that journey was sort of starting to mature 6 months ago or something like that. So it's like, actually, well, okay, if we now want to call an API, we want to integrate this into a chatbot or whatever, we actually have that technology to do that. I think now, from a month or two ago and for the next year is sort of the era where we will see this actually come into applications in a production-ready way. So, Microsoft is coming with their wave 2 of Copilots. Salesforce is, introducing their agent force. Workday is also introducing agent-based systems into there. So you have, many of the software companies now starting to come to market with actual enterprise-ready applications. So where are we in the hype cycle? I think it's we are now in the hype cycle where a non-tech company or a sort of non-software company can start creating significant value with the technology. But we basically weren't sort of 6 months ago, with very clear exceptions, right? If you have, if you are in, for example, pharma research,
right,
or if you are in sort of chemicals, trying to discover new molecules, these types of things, applying foundation models in that context, there's like a killer use case and you can really get significant value out of it. Absolutely. Like those are the types of use cases we've been building a lot in QuantumBlack. If you have a huge customer service operation, you have 4,000, 5,000, call center agents, absolutely. You could go earlier, build your own retrieval augmented generation system, build your own agents for action taking and all of these types of things. So we have those things. They've been happening. Software development much earlier, like everyone is starting to scale that. So I'm not saying there aren't use cases and sort of application areas where there hasn't been significant impact. But I would say, if you think about the value generated from these types of things, 85% of that value is from applying it and transforming business processes. That 85%, we're just scratching the surface. The sort of 15%, which is, the foundation models, the cloud platforms, these types of things, there, I think, much of the value has already sort of started to be created, not least because of, valuations that build on future revenues rather than anything else.
So we're early in actually adopting it at enterprises to really create that value. What do you think are some of the main blockers from now on? Because, the retrieval augmented generation and all of these things, more robust APIs and so on are starting to be there, right? Yeah. So what are the main hurdles ahead?
Well, that's a good question. I think many of the hurdles continue to be the hurdles we've seen in previous technology waves. I think there's just one about, for most large companies, it just takes time to organize yourself Like, figure out what to do, who decides the budget, how are we going to allocate the teams, who's going to be the boss of that, like all of that stuff, that takes most companies at least a year to just figure out. Even if it's like, hey, killer application, we want to do it, it takes us a year just to get organized around how to do it. So there's lots of those things that people don't realize. Just corporate processes just take time, and they can be accelerated, but that really requires that CEO stepping in, etc. So I think that's one of the things that sort of stops it up. I think especially for us in Europe, there's also a regulatory concern, at least, or regulatory worry.
You say concern, worry instead of actual?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of, I won't take a stand on. I mean, it's actual in some instances. Like we have now a bunch of models like OpenAI's voice model.
Right.
You have Meta, Llama 3.2, and these types of models that are not, and Google as well, and Apple, by the way, for the Apple AI, that are not coming to Europe due to, either those companies not liking the regulation or them feeling that there's regulatory uncertainty, etc.
Right.
So I think that's an actual blocker. But if you look at European companies, everyone is worried. They don't really understand what they should be doing. They're not really sure if they can do stuff or not.
Right.
And just, this is such a complex problem. Like, if you are a company, you're trying to do this, you need to both figure out, like, how do I deal with my legacy systems? How do I deal with my data governance? How do I deal with my cloud platform? How do I deal with all my vendors? How do I get all this tech to work together with business that doesn't understand tech? How do I change my business process? How do I recruit people into this type of thing? How do I put it into my budget? Like, there's a million problems to deal with. And now you also need to liaise with lawyers. That's it, like corporate lawyers somewhere in, an office in your building. Maybe they haven't worked with AI before. They don't understand that regulation. So now those guys need to go to conferences, or they need to hire other lawyers, and they need to figure. So you're just adding another layer of complexity.
It's a bit like
equation.
GDPR all over again. When that came to Europe, and I remember the first months, every time you talk to a corporate lawyer, can we do this? It was no, because that was the only thing you could be certain of wouldn't impose a risk, right?
Yeah.
So.
And we see that when we measure it. So we survey regularly people around, like, what are barriers to adoption. European companies score significantly higher. I think it's about 70% that say regulatory concerns are like one of the top concerns for implementing AI systems. So it is real. Like, even if you don't feel the regulatory hurdle is real, you're like, oh, well, you can comply with the regulation. It's definitely a barrier to adoption.
It just feels so much more complex to even look into the regulation, right? Because when you talk to business leaders many times, at least my experience is people are not happy with the regulations, but they can't cite a single kind of part of the regulation they don't like. They haven't even read it most of the times, right? But they know it's troublesome, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I have the same discussion often. We have these, folks that are only experts on these regulations, etc. When I talk to them, they're always like, oh, you're so pessimistic. This is easy. Like, there's no problem. And that's fair enough. Like, if you know the stuff, in and out and etc., maybe you think it's no problem. But, if I have been in, a million workshops with different companies, it's always a problem. Like, everyone is stumbling over that problem.
Right.
They don't even know who to call in legal. Like, I mean, it's just these simple things. It's just like, it's another block between sort of getting to this thing that's pretty hard and where companies are standing now.
Okay, so it's basically the legal aspects might be kind of making people less quick to act.
Yeah.
And you have the management and coordination of a large enterprise to act on these initiatives. What else? Do you think there is a component of like upskilling of people that is needed for large enterprises?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So we can go through them. So one is, get the roadmap right, get the governance right, get the top leadership buy-in, make a few big bets. Very clear. Talent, as you are into, is also, I would say, that the most underappreciated part of talent, which always, when we start these programs, where a year in, is senior business leaders that understand how to drive technology change, technology teams, product owners, product managers, those types of folks, but in a regular business context. But also just like what can bottleneck you is just talent planning, like granular talent planning. It's like, hey, we're now going to build, 15 AI products across our enterprise. That means we need 15 teams, multiplied by 7 people. And we can't just go hire any, people for that. We need to sort of understand what are they actually going to be doing, what is the sort of code they're going to be writing, et cetera, et cetera. So doing that granular talent planning and, getting HR in line to recruit folks and bring folks into the enterprise. Many companies have very complex recruiting types. So we often set up like recruiting war rooms where you are sort of trying to, basically shortcut, or not shortcut, but sort of improve, you might say, onboarding practices, recruiting practices of companies. So all of that, I think, relating to talent is sort of a major bottleneck. I would also say the operating model of many legacy companies and just like how do you bring tech and business together is also just doesn't work. You have an IT department maybe driving development. You have some other people writing requirements on the other side, which for this type of complex stuff doesn't really matter or doesn't really work. You need to bring them together. You need to put them in one team, common business ownership for the problem. That sort of operating model needs to be designed, needs to be put in place. Most folks don't do it. As you were into like the data foundations, like even if you get the people, the operating model right, if you don't have any data governance, you don't have the right data in place, you don't have a data platform that you can work on, that's still going to bottleneck you. So you also need to think about that and get that in order. And then finally, just like what is the technology landscape that we are in? Like how are we dealing with our legacy systems? How are we dealing with our cloud transformation and these things? And how does that fit in? And, once you've done all of that, you might think like, okay, we know what we're going to do. We have the talent to do it. We have the operating model to deploy that talent in sort of an efficient way. Data platform is there. We have good data governance and technology integrations. Like, we know that work. Even though you have all of that, you still have the big problem. Like you still have 4/5 of the problem left, which is how do we change the way everyone is working in this company?
Right.
Because even when you build the system, like nothing has actually happened.
It's the execution part left.
You need to figure out like how the heck do we change our core business process? Like maybe the most important business process we have, maybe there's 500 people that have been working in this business process for 20 years or, on average 10 years or something. How do we, train all of them to do it differently? Convince them that they should be doing it differently. Convince their leaders that they should do it differently. Change their incentive systems if they have different incentives. So all of these types of things you also need to think about. And this is, I think, why there has been a low ROI to digital investments. There has been a lower ROI to AI investments typically. Our estimate is roughly 30% of the value is, that people think they're going to realize with a digital transformation is actually realized in the end. So, you lose 70% of the along the way. And the reason is you have to get all these components right at once.
Right.
You have to multiply each of them with each other, and then you get a very high complexity in managing all of that, especially when you're starting up, like the early startup. So those are the types of things that just makes it really hard to be successful in these. On the other hand, on the other side, you have massive impact. Almost all companies have, real chunks of high impact that they can have with this. I don't think I've seen a single company where we couldn't identify, in these 2, 3, 4 domains, you can have game-changing impact on your EBIT, if you are successful in deploying these. But still, it's really difficult to get to a place where you have that implemented and are getting it out.
And I think that might link back to why, the companies that chooses 1 or 2 domains and really take a hard bet on those have a higher success rates, because then you don't need to coordinate as big part of your organization, right?
Absolutely.
And, when you mentioned the tech maturity and the data foundation and so on, one thing that I think is a bit under-discussed, because, the second phase, as you call it with AI, when you had a lot of focus on structured data for, recommendation system, marketing automation, so on, there has been a lot of focus on like data warehouses and structured data and that part. Whereas now when you enter the third phase with GenAI, it's a very different paradigm when it comes to the underlying technologies, right? And I know a lot of business leaders say kind of, we've invested so much in the data foundation, so let's now do GenAI on top of it. But it's a bit kind of different technologies required sometimes.
Yeah, I think there are, but I think they're also additive, right? I think that sort of if you have a really strong data foundation, you have your data in the cloud, you have great data governance, you have identity access management thought through and thought out. That means when you build your, retrieval system, that is a massive sort of accelerant for you. But it also opens up completely new domains of data that you haven't worked with and you haven't been thinking about how to structure, that you need to sort of add to that data platform and to that technology platform that you have. So I think for me, it's sort of those two always work together.
Right.
Having an amazing data foundation in place and adding this type of technology on top of it, I think is sort of a net addition, basically.
So it's a prerequisite to have done the groundwork first, but it's not necessarily sufficient. You need to
Correct.
do a bit more if you want to adopt maybe GenAI.
Yeah, I would say so. On average, at scale, I think there's also, as you said, if you can carve out a domain, which is a reasonably, there's roughly the same data in that domain, roughly the same technology, roughly the same business leaders. I think you can carve down a smaller piece where you don't necessarily need to do massive technology investments, where you're able to use, for example, almost a plain vanilla language model based on the sort of data that you already have available and actually achieve quite significant impact. So you mentioned marketing automation as one example. So companies that we work with that have sort of a mature marketing automation foundation, and you add sort of a language model layer on top of it, you significantly improve the ROI of that previous investment you did, because you're going from personalizing the product, the time of day, the channel, to also personalizing the language that you use to communicate. So it's sort of just adding something on top that sort of builds on an already solid foundation, so to say.
I know you're traveling a lot. You entered into the studio here with your travel gears.
My wheelchair.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Has it been a lot of travels since ChatGPT for you?
Yeah, there has been a lot of travel since then. So it's probably half of the working days or something like that.
Yeah.
I will spend on the road now. I think interestingly also just reflecting the differentiated momentum of AI. I've never worked so much in the US as I work now, which is also actually something we see in the numbers. It's like US companies just spend 70% more on AI technology. So it's sort of, they're also just ahead on that. But yeah, so spending quite a lot of time in airplanes, flying back and forth, meeting people. But I love meeting people. So I like, I also do digital meetings, but like I am just on a personal level, without taking any broader implications into space. I don't like having like a day when I just have virtual meetings. It's like a day where my energy level goes down, because it's like, it's super comfy to be just in your office or to be home, but it's like you don't get the interaction, you don't get the energy from the people, etc.
Right.
So I also like to be on site.
When you travel around the world working with these topics, do you see a difference in maturity?
Yeah, I very much do. Which will be like, overall, of course, like when you're in San Francisco, there's like a very clear difference in maturity that most companies are software companies, etc. I would also say that, in the US, there is significantly higher maturity and ambition overall in the AI space than we're seeing in most of Europe. There's higher investment levels. There's bigger bets being made, sort of bolder management teams on that side. So I would say that sort of differentiated maturity, yes.
Are you in Asia and like Middle East and those regions as well?
I do spend time in the Middle East, sometimes in Asia, but less frequently travel to Asia.
Because there are quite big investments in those regions as well when it comes to AI.
For sure. I mean, Middle East is probably I don't know if it's the largest, but if you look at the Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds and you just look at the news, it's sort of at least $140 billion USD that has been announced, in the newspaper that they are investing behind that type of momentum. So there's definitely a lot of investment. Many of the companies in the Middle East also invest a lot into their own AI ecosystems, are trying to build their own sort of leading position in AI. So I would say there's sort of very high activity and very high focus from several of the Middle Eastern companies in doing that. I would say, across broader Asia, it's of course so extremely differentiated, so it's sort of extremely hard to say something. But I would say I would also say it's more differentiated. Like I worked with one Asian bank where it's like the CEO is super committed and basically just like, hey, we're going to AI transform the whole bank, has every other week steercos, every business leader has to come in and answer for like, how are we implementing this? How are we driving that sort of extreme ambition level? And then, in some other countries, if you talk to maybe a company in Japan, there will be a sort of different ambition level and understanding level. So I think that sort of differs a lot.
Right. How does the ambition level and investment level translate into actual adoption? Do you see a difference there as well?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes, it does. I mean, of course, in the software space, for sure. In the wider corporate space, if you look at some of the really big cases we've seen, most of the really big cases we've seen where, what you would call traditional companies have had significant impact with these types of technologies, most of those cases we've seen have been in the US. So, there are examples of large energy companies with, 150 plus models in production, optimizing the set parameters across, all of their different power producing plants. There's sort of large mining, companies that are running optimization in all their production processes that are sort of having, billions of USD equivalent of impact within those, consumer CPG companies that are, running very advanced revenue management type of systems with, more than 100 people working in building those types of solutions. So there are those like traditional companies with, not to mention supply chain, by the way, and supply end-to-end optimization of supply chains. So there are sort of large companies who've had, billion-dollar plus impacts from driving large initiatives like that, where, you have 50 to 100 developers plus that are building those solutions. You're changing the core business process of your enterprise. You are making all the technology investments into your backbone that is required to do that. And those types of cases, which are sort of large scale, CEO leans in, 50 to 100 developers plus type of cases, we see many more of, I think, on the US side than we've seen on the European side.
That's very interesting. Do you think that's because of the US leaders being more willing to lean in and commit?
Yeah, I think there is a perhaps higher tolerance for taking risk and making bets.
Right.
Which this typically involves. So it's big business cases, but they also require, big bets to go after them. I think that might be part of the equation. There's another part of the equation, which is also very natural. It's just they also have bigger companies.
So there's more impact.
There's more impact. Like, one CEO can have more impact by leaning in, sort of say, in something that's a complex case. If you think about transforming a supply chain or these types of things, like the amount of developers and technical investments you need to do are not they don't scale with the size of the company.
So they basically have a better economies of scale.
Yes.
And when you mentioned the kind of use cases for like mining companies when it comes to optimization and the power plants and so on, it sounds to be, a lot of the use cases from the second phase of AI, as you described it, the more kind of traditional machine learning, optimization, and so on.
Yeah.
What's the split that you see out there right now? Because, today when we talk about AI, it's a bit synonymous with generative AI. Yeah. But when you look at actually what is being implemented gaining adoption and having impact? What's the split in practice?
Yeah, so I mean, so we've actually sort of at least done our estimate of where do we think the impact lies, and it's about 2/3 still lie in what we would call traditional AI, so analytical AI, machine learning models, predictive models, optimization models, these types of things. So that's
Structured
still
data.
true. Structured data for the most part. And you can often append GenAI on top to work better with it. But yes, those types of structured analytical AI type of use cases, I think are still a majority of the value, even with generative AI. So that's sort of one thing to get clear. And I think that's still the case if you look at AI programs that are running. I would say the big exceptions now are, software development for sure, where we are running several of those very large engineering transformations where, we're helping all the software engineers reinvent the software development lifecycle of those companies using the AI tools in that software development lifecycle. That's a lot of impact that comes from there. Also large IT services companies, these types of things. So I think that's one domain where generative AI is much stronger. And customer service is the other domain where I think we also see the generative AI cases be much stronger. Large telco operators, large banks, financial institutions, everyone who has a huge call center. And then the industry that works to serve them. So customer service outsourcing companies, the BPO companies,
right,
that are in the sort of same space, if you will.
I know McKinsey has conducted several big case studies and reports on the potential of AI and generative AI.
Yeah.
And it's called kind of the new productivity frontier, right? And there is estimates of these new technologies generating up to 4.4 trillion USD in value.
Yeah.
Can you break down these numbers a bit?
Yeah. So that is roughly right. And then, what's interesting is it's a little bit, we've made a couple of different approaches to that calculation. So it's sort of 4.4 up to 7, depending on if you look at all the work tasks that could be automated versus all the use cases. So
right.
Your number was the use case number. So that one actually we've built up pretty clearly with exactly where it comes from. And the top ones are the ones that I mentioned now. It's sort of software development, both for software and for traditional IT companies, IT outsourcing, these types of things. Customer service, marketing and sales, where we're still earlier in marketing and sales than we are in customer service and software development. But I think that's now coming in a big way because it's both been implemented into the marketing and sales platforms that people are using, both on the sales platforms, people like Salesforce, and marketing platforms, Google, Adobe, these types of things.
Right.
So that's sort of one of the major areas where we see significant impact come from these. So that's sort of the cluster of use cases, which I think is sort of more than half of that value that comes from those different functions. But then you have all the traditional use cases that are still out there, which underlie these, if it's like marketing automation and these types of things, or if it's more operational type of use cases, supply chain and these types of things I've mentioned. All of this, though, it's interesting to note, doesn't necessarily take into account that there might be future waves of productivity that might accelerate adoption even further. So if you think about how can you use foundation models, digital surrogates, digital twins to do training of robotics.
Right.
That is a sort of next paradigm that might also be very impactful.
Which industries do you see being in the forefront, adopting, Gen AI for software development or customer support, marketing, etc.? Is it kind of even, or are there certain industries like banking and others, telcos, that are much more aggressive on that?
Yeah, it tends to follow, how much pressure and competition have those industries been under. So software will always be sort of top of the list because it's sort of very decisive, the impact that it has there. But then you have industries like all media and communication types of industries, professional services types of industries, You have also like retail that has been under significant pressure. So, retail, you've had your Amazon marketing and these types of things. You've had your Googles, your Metas. So where there's been intense and fierce competitions, those tend to have been much earlier adopters. And then you will have the other side of the equation, which will be much more your industrial type of companies, your process industries, mining, and these types of things that have been, well, actually, mining has actually been a bit higher there, but those types of companies overall that have been on the other side of the adoption curve. And we actually measure this. So we run this survey. We've run with, I think it's 4,000 companies at this point, where we look pretty granularly at the AI readiness of those companies. And you can actually measure, the AI readiness almost as like what is the pressure on the industry and sort of how much delivery pressure has there been on these types of things. Banking maybe also, I missed, lies on the higher end of the spectrum. Healthcare is far up as well in terms of high potential but lower adoption. Life sciences, quite high potential, higher adoption.
How do you measure this AI readiness? Because I think that's something every kind of enterprise wants to figure out. How ready are we for AI?
Yeah, so this we've been doing, I think we started in 2017 or something. So we also have a bit of a time series. So we call it something fancy, AI quotient or something similar like that. But it's basically a breakdown of what we have seen to be the best practices to be able to scale AI across companies. So it's something like 50, 60 different things that are difficult to game.
Right.
Like questions that you ask, which is like you almost have to answer truthfully. So we take down all those questions. What we do is we survey, between a couple of dozen to a couple of hundred employees, depending on the size of the company, to measure across stuff like data readiness, data maturity, platform maturity, technological maturity, talent maturity, business leadership, vision, strategy, like all of these different dimensions that you need to have. And then we, help folks benchmark against others in their industry, against leaders in their industry, against other industries on all of these practices. And then also that sort of helps folks, over time as you work 3-4 years, across the transformation, you also can sort of track how you are sort of improving those practices. And that will be everything down to like, do you have sort of proper MLOps, DevOps practices in place? Do you have a mature cloud platform that you're working on? To, have you integrated this perspective into your business strategies? Do you have, impact quantified and included in your business plans and budgets? So it sort of goes the entire chain. Right. And over time, the interesting thing is when we measure this over time is on aggregate, we see significantly higher shareholder returns to companies that have a high AI maturity. So not comparing, your Netflix with your traditional company, but actually measuring peers in the same industry and looking at it over time and what is the shareholder return type of impact.
Right. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, for me, it's sort of both on the productivity side, if you get this right, if you understand how to do it, you have the leaders to drive it, you can get significant productivity out of it. So you get a new toolbox of productivity that your competitors don't have. On product innovation, so your products will on average be better. They will be more personalized. They will be more user-friendly or more optimized if you're in sort of more of an industrial setting. And, from a business building or competitive perspective, it also allows you to enter adjacent spaces to your core industry by thinking about building new products and things like this. So it sort of, it gives you a toolbox to act within both products, productivity, product innovation, and sort of within the competitive environment that others don't have. So for me, it's very natural that happens. I mean, we are talking about now a internet-sized shift over, let's say, the next 15 years or so, as this set of technologies, this sort of wave of technologies rolls out across the economy. if you look at hindsight, was tech maturity a differentiator for companies as the internet rolled out and those technologies rolled out? Yes, absolutely. And I think it will be probably even stronger in this wave of technology, given how much more impactful many of these things are on the enterprise and corporate environment, whereas the previous generations were more consumer oriented. So I think it's very differentiating to have strong capabilities within this space.
Right. And going back to one of the areas that you say has had kind of the most impact so far, software development. I mean, very early after ChatGPT, reports started to come out stating productivity gains of software developers using GenAI went up like between 40, 60, sometimes you saw 100% improvement in productivity. And we also have people like Jensen Huang saying, you shouldn't learn programming in the future because that will be taken care of by GenAI. And I know in one of the panels, you mentioned that it's not right now that you see kind of a steady productivity increase across every software developer. There is some nuance to that, right? So depending on your seniority.
Yeah.
Do you want to break that down?
Yeah. First of all, our belief is we'll probably net, have more software developers over time because the sort of demand for these types of solutions just go up. There is, of course, a scenario in the future where you have, outsized automation, etc. But for now, that is the case.
What time horizon are we talking about, roughly?
So that is super difficult.
I'm asking for everyone who is like, should I learn programming or not?
Well, before I did these types of things, I studied philosophy and history. Right. I still feel I have great benefit from doing that. I think having an education and understanding how technology systems work, how software development works, etc., even when you have really strong, AI agents doing much of the work, I still think is a very solid educational foundation for, the types of tasks that we will, see in the economy and that are happening in the economy. So, on average, I'd probably say that that's a great place to start in sort of an AI society. Understanding how AI works is great.
So go study programming.
Go study, also actually go study, philosophy, history of ideas, these types of things, because it's gives you a much richer understanding of life and it's a lot of fun. But yeah, from a career perspective, understanding how these systems work and being able to work with them, I think is also great. So I wouldn't advise my kids, against doing that. But also having like a rich set of experiences, more creativity, etc. I think is just helpful.
Right.
On your question on the sort of outcomes for programmers, I think what we had all these numbers that came out, early on in this boom. We were measuring it; others were also measuring it, and sometimes folks threw around these percentages without being specific about what are the percentages. So it's like you have 30-40% uplift in an isolated task. Like, hey, I want you to create this very specific application. I'm going to give one software developer the tool. I'm going to give the other one not the tool, and we're able to accelerate by 40% the one that got the tool. So that's great, but it's also, if you look at aggregate for a company that has 2,000 software developers, they're not spending, all of their time on those types of isolated tasks. They're also doing the whole product management. They're doing the sort of testing. They are doing the sort of cybersecurity part of things. They are, sitting in meetings and going to, all hands meetings and all of that stuff, right? So you have to actually average that out on an entire organization. I think what we are seeing now scaling is, more like 8-10% on average in, increased velocity for a software engineering organization, with all the caveats that that's impossible to measure. But we also see high differentiation in the software developers. So more senior software developers that are more used to checking stuff from junior folks tend to do much better in this environment. whereas sort of junior folks that don't really have the pattern recognition and can't quickly see what's wrong and what's right in code tend to do a little bit worse in this environment so far.
Can they be less productive with a tool than without the junior?
Yeah, I think actually on average we measured lower productivity with the very junior bracket of software developers that are sort of coming in to use that tool because they just don't know what to do with what comes out. They don't know how to do the prompting, etc.
And when it hallucinates, they just trust it.
I think on average it was about 6 months ago I did that walkthrough, but I remember we did this walkthrough of like what is the percentage of the generated code that's actually wrong, and it was sort of 60%. So it's like the majority still of what you get is actually wrong. So
right.
Your job is actually fixing code that's wrong, right. And which makes it easy to understand like why you would want to be more senior and have more pattern recognition of understanding what works and what doesn't work. So I think you'll get all those artifacts of a new way of working and sort of a new way of operating. And I'm sure that will evolve as the tools evolve. The emphasis will move back and forward between different types of things. We're now getting more and more agent-based, these coding tools. That will be another paradigm. We recently got, the completely new model from OpenAI in this case, the sort of reasoning model, better at software development. Maybe that has less errors in it, and then, that balance will shift. But that's what we've seen so far.
Right. So right now, if you're above a certain threshold in skill as a developer, you can get that productivity gain. But if you're below, it might harm you more than it helps you.
Yeah, for the early stages.
Yeah, as the models become better and better, that threshold of what you need to know will, of course, go down.
Very plausibly. Very plausibly. I think that might be the case. But then you should also think about it sort of we have a practice that have been working with engineering excellence for many years before this arrived in the previous generations of the tool. And what they always, tell me and other folks is like, look, we for a long time have known how to step into a software development organization and make it radically better. So it's like, it's not news that you can make a software organization radically better by improving the software development lifecycle, by running large scale automation of processes that you have, etc. It still doesn't happen automatically. You still need to train the developers. You still need to think rigorously about how do you organize that process, organize into your product. Like all of that stuff, has been there for a long while, but people
right.
still haven't done it. So even with, you think you just use, some sort of Copilot tool, that doesn't happen organically. You still need to teach developers how to work with it, teach them how to do the prompting, teach them how to do the QA of the code that comes out, help the junior folks figure out how to work with it, etc. So there's still quite a lot of work involved with actually getting that stuff to work in practice. People that just like give people licenses to that type of tool, they get very little productivity uplift.
It's a bit like the more unfocused approach where you do a lot of pilots instead of being very intentional.
Exactly.
I mean, we've covered this throughout the conversation, but what would you say is the main driver for someone to reach out to you and your colleagues to get help when it comes to AI? Is it, the opportunity, value creation? Is it fear? Is it FOMO? Like, what is the main driver?
Yeah.
Because in the pilot phase, there was a lot of FOMO. I mean, we talk a decade back. Everyone wanted cognitive chatbots, didn't really exist. No one really understood what they could do with it, right? But there was a lot of money invested at that point in time.
Yeah. No, I think I'll have to split it into a few archetypes to give you a good answer. I think, there is definitely fear of missing out from folks across the space, right? But there is the chairman, CEO, who are more like, this looks really exciting. Everyone is telling me this is super cool. By the way, my investors or my board is asking me questions around this. What can it actually do for us? Like, how should we actually deal with it? What should be our strategy? That's one big archetype. Not maybe for FOMO, but more for like, let's take this seriously as something that could potentially change equation for us. Then, there's the CIO, CTO type of folks that reach out and just say like, I'm getting all these crazy requests from the business. Everyone is saying AI is going to be transformative. But I look at the other side, like we're just not ready. We have no plan for how to deal with this. Like, how the heck should we be thinking about that? Which I think is sort of a different archetype. Then I think there might be this sort of FOMO type of stuff as well, but that would be even more, I think, from like smaller business divisions or people running startups or like more entrepreneurial type of settings where things are more fast moving and folks are much more nervous about what's going on. But there's always the underlying question. Everyone is getting asked all the time, what are you doing with AI? So like I think everyone has in their mind like I need to have a good answer to that question.
Right.
So that's clear. And everyone has a good answer to that question, by the way. Like when we're looking at, I'm not going to say it's a good answer, but it's sort of a well-rehearsed answer. So when we look at, acquiring companies, we do due diligences and these types of things. And then we do, AI due diligences and we try to figure out like, what is this company actually doing with it? So everyone has a really good story around what they're trying to do with AI. And then sort of you need to scratch the surface and it's very differentiated to what extent that's actually being put into practice or is actually well thought through.
But that's a bit different this time around compared to like a decade ago, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say on balance, people are more serious now.
Yeah, because a decade ago, people could say all of the crazy stuff that, was more science fiction, right? And things just didn't add up.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people are coming at this now from more of a perspective as I realize this is an internet size shift. I realize it's going to be major. Maybe it doesn't happen next year, but like we need to have a serious approach to it. Right. That is more often the entry point now or the starting point for a discussion now. Whereas, as you say, 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was much more like, hey, we've heard this really cool use case. Should we go do it? Or something like that, which was much more fragmented.
How do you feel when you talk to like, you can differentiate into like the boards and the C-levels, but the expectations that they have when they approach you and like, I want to do X, Y, Z within AI. Like how realistic is their expectation this time around?
Yeah, I would actually be quite, there are of course these cases where it's like, hey, I've had the question of like, we as investors, couldn't AI just replace us? So like you have those questions where it's like, no, that's not really realistic. But I would say on balance, when folks approach us, we are probably more aggressive in our assumptions than most business leaders would be. So I think many business leaders are, come and they say, hey, we think we can achieve something great. We think maybe we should do something that has, this 1-2% impact or incremental impact here. Whereas our comeback would be, then you probably shouldn't do it. You should do it if it's like a 30% impact. And we've seen that be done. So I think on average, we would probably be more ambitious than the clients that meet.
But isn't that different from a decade ago?
Yeah, well,
I'm
not sure.
I have the feeling back then we always had to kind of do expectations management, but lower their expectations. Now it seems to be a bit different.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
People maybe have been burnt a few times. They are like adjusting their expectations.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, but you're probably right. Like there's less upfront, just level setting, I guess, as you say. Like folks come in with a more level-headed view. I probably have thought much more about this. Many of those folks, like senior leaders, they were also around 2017, by the way. They've seen it fail a couple of times. So I think folks are on average more mature in their thinking, level-headed, understanding what's happening. But I think there's still, for most, I would say there's still a, number one, there's sort of a business case magic idea or sort of AI magic perception around where it's like, we can put a small development team and we can do something, really big.
Right.
And I think my reply is probably often then is like, you probably shouldn't do that, but you should put 10 teams and you should expect, 30 times more impact. So I think that's maybe more where the disalignment exists, because most folks maybe are thinking about deploying a couple of people or one team or two teams or something like that. Whereas we will typically, be in the camp of you need to fundamentally rethink this business process. That's actually quite a big business problem that will require quite a lot of effort to do, but the payoff is going to be much higher than you think.
Right, so it's the difference between kind of choosing the 1-2 domains and going all in versus doing a pilot here and there.
Yeah, I think something like that, yeah.
Yeah, you don't really give it a chance to succeed if you don't put sufficient amount of effort and resources into it.
Exactly. I think it's the most common failure mode is you spread your chips thin. Like on the roulette table, you put like a couple of chips on each of the little squares, and then, you hope you win.
Right.
It's a poor simile, because I wouldn't tell you to put all your chips on two squares on the roulette table. I think actually if you put all your chips, you don't have to do it on the roulette table. You can actually put it somewhere else where the return is reasonably safe. Right. But you build resilience, robustness into your business case by focusing more.
Right. Coming towards the end here, like what would you say are top 3 most important things for a business leader to think about if they now want to go all in on AI? We've talked about a lot of success factors already, but what would be the top 3 ones?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first one is really taking a step back and spending a couple of months with your leadership team, figuring out what are those big bets that we should be making. Because I do feel people rush into it, they do it too bottom up. So I think spending a little bit of time doing that, I think that would be number 1. Number 2, which is related to that, I would say, don't underestimate the capability challenge. Make sure you build capabilities and understanding in the senior group of people that are required to sort of drive this, so you don't get this situation with delegated understanding. So the business leaders actually take accountability to understand what needs to be done, and then sort of go for driving it. And then I think 3 is, while you've done all of that, be comfortable stepping into a larger investment where it's not 100% clear exactly how you are going to deliver returns. You know what the business logic is, but you don't know exactly how you're going to get into it. So you have to be comfortable stepping into that type of business case, which if you are in manufacturing will be very different from the types of business case you're used to stepping into.
Right.
But just make sure to have the funding mechanisms to do, incremental drops, be very engaged in the process to make sure that you get those returns. But when you step in, be a little bit ready. There's going to be a lot of ambiguity around it.
Cool. So nothing around like the technology parts, more around.
We can get that fixed. I mean, it's sort of technology is maturing all over the place. Absolutely, you need to have massive data foundations that are good, that work with that, et cetera, et cetera. But that's like, once you have, here's a blockbuster business case.
That's not going to be the blocker. It's not the risk factor.
That's
right?
not the risk factor.
No.
That we can do.
I agree. And the final question. What are you the most excited about for the future?
That is a good question. What am I most excited about? So I will say I am most excited right now about physical world AI. So we talk a lot about language models, software applications, etc. We are on the cusp of getting real multimodal vision models. We're on the cusp of getting, foundation models for robotics. So you get robots that at very low installation costs can interact with their environments. And, these form factors where you do augmented reality, etc. So as someone who works in technology, I'm always excited about what is sort of the next paradigm. So
right.
This hasn't happened yet, but I can see that that's where we're going. So, when I get questions with investors, etc., when I sort of can't stop talking, and as you notice, I can't stop talking a lot, but that is especially when they sort of are like, oh, will this maybe impact how, also blue collar workers are working, or installation services are working, or, how we're working in factories? It's like, yes, that's the next wave.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Gardar, for attending the podcast and sharing all of this knowledge.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.